Hello, and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I am so thrilled that we have today with us Andrew Cartmel, the author of the Vinyl Detective series, because we will be discussing the first book in the series, written in dead wax.
Hi, guys. It's very exciting to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, we like to start off on a positive note, just a little dose of positivity at the beginning of our podcast. So, anything good happened this week?
The sun's been shining here in London between high winds and rain. It's been actually gloriously sunny today. Spring does feel like it's here at last. Yay.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It's always nice to have a little bit of sun in between the rain.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's spring when the cat starts spending more time out in the garden than she does indoors. So that's always a terrific sign. And not entirely irrelevant to our discussion, because I think we'll get to the cats in my fiction, who correspond rather closely to the cats in my real life.
There will be some cat questions, yes.
It wouldn't be our podcast without cat talk.
Exactly. So my good thing is that I took today off of work, so I got to sleep in for an extra hour.
Congrats.
That's always nice.
Yes. And Lily?
Well, it hasn't happened yet, so it's a little bit cheating, but I am getting my first vaccine this afternoon.
Congratulations.
Oh.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to drive almost an hour to get to it, but it's worth it.
Definitely.
Well, Sarah, we'll start with Sarah instead of making you guys guess who to talk first. Read anything good lately, just not podcast related?
I read a lot of Leigh Bardugo books. I think I read like 4.5 Leigh Bardugo books in the last week. So that was a lot.
It's a lot of reading.
Yeah, it was a lot of reading.
And I'm currently rereading a lot of classic crime and suspense novels by John D. MacDonald, who's one of my favorite writers of all time. Actually, next up is a departure for him, which is basically a realistic comic novel about an art colony in Mexico called Please Write for Details. But other than that, I have been reading a lot of music biographies. I read a very good one on Zappa, and I'm reading the definitive biography of the Rolling Stones at the moment by Philip Norman, and I'm sort of on that kind of tangent.
Are you reading those for pleasure or for research?
Yes, what it was, Sarah, is I really got into early Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, and I'm fascinated by him. So I got a hold of the best biography, and then there's a fantastic book, which is a memoir written by a woman who is both in his life romantically, although that word doesn't apply with Zappa, and also was a guitarist in his band called Nigel Lennon. And it's a great book, and it really shines a different light on the person. And again, with the Stones, I've been listening to a lot of classic early Stones albums, and it's just, I like to know the circumstances of how they were made, but I also ended up getting interested in, if I like somebody's music, I end up interested in their life.
Absolutely, yeah, and finding out sort of how those two things connect is always so fascinating.
Exactly.
I have not read a single thing, but I did read the programming instructions on a new coffee machine to set it up so that it starts making coffee before I wake up in the morning. So that was nice.
Would be an endeavor very close to the heart of my protagonist.
Yes. There might be a few very close to home reasons why we loved this book.
Yes.
Yay.
So speaking of the book, I have a quote that is going to segue into our next question. I hope you don't mind that we're quoting your book at you.
No, I think it's the coolest thing ever.
So there's a quote on page 184. I generally save the wine, said Lenny, until the end of the working day or for a special occasion. The end of the working day is a special occasion, I always say, said Nevada. And that is appropriate because it is not the end of the day for us, although it's later for you. And I'm going to ask, what are you drinking tonight?
Oh, tonight I'm drinking nothing more exciting than pure water, because I'm very healthy. Plus, when I say hot chocolate, it sounds like, I'm going to have a lovely little hot chocolate and sit in a corner. But no, I drink really high-end hot chocolate. And the thing about this stuff is it's packed not with caffeine, but a close relative of caffeine called theobromine, which is like caffeine but gives a smoother rush. So basically, I'm a caffeine freak addicted to hot chocolate. So I will, if I'm good, I reward myself with a really nice high-end, high cocoa content hot chocolate. But I have been known to drink wine, but because lockdown, which is when we're recording this in 2021, has severed a lot of socializing for the time being. I only drink socially. I never drink except when I'm hanging out with a bunch of friends. So I've got some fabulous red wine ready to go and some really good white wine. But those are waiting for an occasion when I've got my friends around me. So that's why they're not being consumed.
That makes sense.
Well, just another reason to celebrate the people getting vaccinated and the end of this nonsense.
Yes.
Absolutely. And we did have some friends around because we were shooting a little short film outdoors last week, and we all had a little bit of some very nice champagne. So that was great. It was the first time since Christmas that I'd actually had that kind of social celebration thing going on. It felt lovely.
That first time seeing someone face to face, someone outside of your household face to face, is such a weird experience.
Yeah. There's other people out there.
Yeah. And they're three-dimensional.
It's fantastic. Although I do think people get zoomed out, but I do love the fact that Zoom allows us this degree of interaction.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, what about you? What are you drinking?
I am drinking mimosas because I felt weird drinking straight champagne or straight wine at 11 in the morning. So mimosas it is.
So some nutritious fruity things have been added to sort of as a fig leaf for your
exactly.
drinking.
It has orange juice. That's healthy, right?
Yeah, you're not a day drinker as long as it has orange juice in it.
Exactly.
Strangely enough, that's my answer too.
For the same reason?
Yeah. Also because they're delicious. Although I am drinking mine with blueberry lemonade.
Ooh, that sounds good. I just have the blueberry lemonade. But Bucks Fizz's champagne and orange juice and mimosa must involve something else as well.
I think it's just...
That might be a regional difference.
Yeah. I think here, at least in California, it's mimosa is just champagne and orange juice.
Just bring on the blueberry lemonade. That sounds good.
Well, we've been reading quite a few mystery novels for this podcast, but I have to say it was so nice coming back to a tried and true detective novel. It hit me right in my Agatha Christie heart.
I'm so pleased.
Just something about it is so different.
The interesting thing is that when I wrote that first novel in the series, I obviously was aware of Agatha Christie's huge stature, but I hadn't read any of her stuff. But now I'm a bit of an Agatha Christie fiend. And for the fifth novel in the series, which we won't get to today, but just so you know, that was written heavily under the influence of Agatha Christie. Like I was absolutely wanted to do something in the zone where she operates. So yeah, I'm a big admirer of Christie.
Oh, I can't wait to get there.
And we probably will end up discussing more of the series on the podcast.
Oh, I do hope so. Just for if people are interested, it's Low Action, and the way in which, the novel, the fifth novel is called Low Action. The way in which it is like Christie is that I was really in love with the way she will set up a whole bunch of suspects, all of whom were equally plausible, to be innocent or to be guilty as sin. And I just thought, I want to try that. And that's what I did that time. That was my particular homage to Christie.
Well, I can't wait. The characters written in dead wax were all so compelling that reading a bunch of suspects is going to be very fun.
That classic kind of 10 Little Indians mold that, when you just know that somebody in there is not right, but you don't know who it is.
Absolutely, that tension. And we're discussing one of your novels today, but you've actually written for a huge variety of different formats. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how story writing is different for different media.
Yeah, I've written for television, TV scripts, TV drama scripts, and I've written for what we would call graphic novels, but less pretentiously, we could just call comics. And I have written audio adventures, and I have written stage plays and novels. And of those two, stage plays and novels are absolutely my top love. At the moment, I'm writing both today. I was working on both a stage play and a novel, the new vinyl detective novel, the sixth one in the series.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah, it's called Attack and Decay, and it's about Scandinavian death metal. And so I was having fun writing that today. But they are so different. I think the novel is the purest form of writing because it goes straight into the head of the reader, assuming they are fluent in the language that you're writing in. What you're expressing will go almost unmediated into their minds. So it has great purity and great power, and I love that. And the way you can do absolutely anything in a novel. But the great thing about writing scripts of any form is that there's so much you can leave out. You literally don't need prose. You don't need any description. Well, in comics, you need a bit of description, and movies, I guess, just to set the scene, even less in a stage play. But you don't have to give this constant stream of narrative. So much as in film and television and playwriting and audio, radio plays, for instance, it's basically dialogue. You might have some effects, some music, but essentially it's a matter of writing dialogue. And Somerset Maugham once said that if you can write dialogue, you can pretty much write a stage play. And although it isn't quite as simple as that, that's kind of 90% true. And I love writing dialogue, which feeds into the novels too. There'll be stretches of the novels where it's mostly, the story's mostly advanced by dialogue, which is a technique used by writers as diverse as George V. Higgins, great American crime writer who is a master of mostly dialogue novels. But Jane Austen uses dialogue to advance the plot to a surprising degree. And Agatha Christie, one thing I noticed when I started reading her stuff is that her dialogue is really good. Like, it's very natural sounding, and she's good at writing. I wouldn't necessarily know if she's good at writing other nationalities, but within England, she writes the different class strata very well. And it sounds like real people talking, and that's no small trick.
Absolutely. Dialogue is one of those things where if someone slips a little bit, it's very obvious.
Yeah.
Things can be very clunky and expositional too. But good dialogue is wonderful because it brings the characters to life, but also because it can really help move a story along.
Beyond just dialogue, this book is actually written in the first person. So it's almost like the entire novel is dialogue because you're hearing the character tell us the story.
It's the internal monologue of the character. That's very true. I love writing in the first person. And it's the easiest way to give your book natural attitude, if I can call it that. It can give a really distinctive characteristic to the entire narrative because it's being told, as we said, in the internal voice of one particular person. And it's also particularly apt for crime novels, perhaps because of the tradition of the hard-boiled novel and also film noir, which often tends to be narrated by a doomed individual. So it comes with the territory to an extent with a crime story, I think.
I was going to comment on that because for those listeners who have listened to previous episodes, they know that Lily is generally tends not to be a fan of first person, but we were discussing this earlier, and we both feel that it works so well for The Vinyl Detective, partially because it's a callback to, as you say, the noir film, but also just you do it very, very well.
Well, thank you. It's very kind. Also, part of the influence, I suppose, was that my friend Ben Aronovich, who writes a great series of novels called the Rivers of London series, which are told very idiosyncratically in the first person. I wasn't unaware of his considerable success, but I wouldn't have approached this and done it in the first person unless I felt that it totally suited my own approach.
Well, it fits so well, and the narration voice is so strong that it really adds a very subtle humor to the prose that I quite enjoyed, despite being hard on first person.
Sorry, no, I felt bad that we forced you to read a first person book and maybe more. But the thing about humor was I'm now with a different agent, but the agent I was with when I was first writing these books, he kept reading them and he'd say, but they're funny, like this was kind of a flaw or a problem. And he just didn't get that there might be this was a number of years back, and it was at the absolute height of the sort of grisly Scandi noir type things, which were quite both unflinching and unsmiling,
Mm-hmm.
And I think he might have been a bit saturated with that, but that's no real excuse because ever since there's been crime fiction, there's been wacky or offbeat or cozy or funny or sardonic crime fiction. So I just don't think he got it, which is one reason it took a number of years for these books to find a home.
Well, I'm very glad they did.
Yes, me too.
And me too. Amen.
Well, as the name of the series might suggest, The Vinyl Detective, there are quite a few different subjects or hobbies that are very vivid in this story. And it must be impossible to write about such specific topics like vinyl, jazz, or even cooking without a certain level of personal investment.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
And I was wondering, well, just how much of your own interests made it onto the page. Did you even have to research?
Well, I try not to make the character, the protagonist, the vinyl detective, too much like me. And to that end, I was, I think we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but my friend Ben Aronovich, who was sort of consulting with me when I was coming up with this, he asked me if I was going to include the cats in the book. Should we talk a little bit about that now?
Yes.
Because I'm a cat lover. So he said, are you going to include cats? And I said, no, because I'll just make it too much like me and nobody wants to read about cats. How wrong I was. He insisted that I include them. I think just because, well, I know exactly why, because I'd written a short story, a science fiction short story that never went anywhere, but it featured a couple of cats, and he really liked the way the cats were written about in it. So he knew that they weren't going to be, I wasn't likely to depict my cats as cloying or kind of silly, but that they would work on the page. And so that was one reason he encouraged me to do it. And they work, I have to say, I'm so glad he did, because the cats, they're just, you're talking about the sort of hobbies or the interest that our character has. Cats are all part of that. They're kind of part of this tapestry of everyday life, which is what you want your exciting crime and suspense novel to take place in front of, if you know what I mean. You want to have this realistic, fairly low-key background, which is your starting point for your characters as they then get involved in and embroiled in murder and mayhem and intrigue.
Oh, I loved that. There's sort of the backdrop of the terrible management company that managed the property. Right. And yes, that is something that I'm very familiar with.
Yeah, again, it was low-hanging fruit because a lot of that's based on where I live and the sort of situations there. But also, there's always that desire to look for the sardonic humor and things. So if the management company had been supremely efficient, there wouldn't have been any mileage for that kind of material there.
Right, but it also gives that relatability to so many people, and that opportunity to feel closer with the main character in that way.
That's so true. In fact, I just finished a play which I think will find an audience because everything about it is just something you completely can relate to. So I understand how important that is. And I think one of the things about this book in particular, that the first book in the series that will resonate with people, is that our hero has quite a hard time, like, making ends meet. He's scuffling for funds, things go wrong for him. We all have been there, so we all will tend to invest an amount of our sympathy and empathy with the characters in a situation like that.
Absolutely. And going back to the cats a little bit, I have another quote that I've pulled out, partially because it's just so evident throughout this book that you're a cat person, and I love it. Like, it adds such a depth to it. But I read this for the first time in 2018, I think was when I read it. And you have this line, he lifted a second finger and said, "Water. Make sure there's always a bowl of water for Turk. But Fanny likes to drink from the tap. So if she jumps up on the sink, I run the tap for a while and let her drink. Also in the bathtub. If she jumps in the empty tub and goes scratchy, scratchy, scratch, that means I run the bath tap for a minute. And she drinks from that because human beings are her slaves and vassals, since she's a cat and she's in charge." And it's just, cats. It's clear.
I have no illusions. I have no illusions. Yeah.
I can't imagine this novel without the cats. Or the rest of the novels without the cats either.
They're crucial. They're a crucial little counterpoint. You don't need a lot of them, but they just they define the character and they make the character seem real. And also it's true, they provide comic relief. They provide story opportunities in at least one novel where they feature in the plot. And they just kind of fill out the picture, because I know there's a tendency for, especially in hard-boiled crime, for the detective to be a blank slate, just sort of a hard-drinking loner who sleeps in a room with nothing in it. But that gets very boring very easily. And there's a counter-tradition of the eccentric, colorful detectives who are nothing but quirks and unusual characteristics. So somewhere between the two resides my detective, with his cats, his cookery, his hi-fi, and his love of vinyl.
Yeah, it feels very grounded in reality in a way that not everything does.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of, because I do love cats and I love crime fiction, I've sort of dipped into some other books that are sort of crime cats, and they're on a spectrum which goes right out to kind of wild, wacky, crime-solving, sentient cats, right down to just ones with a cat in the background. So mine are realistic background cats.
Definitely.
Speaking of vinyl, that is obviously a huge, a huge component of the vinyl detective series. I don't know if that gave it away for anyone, but you explain it in such an accessible way. I personally am not a vinyl enthusiast, but I never felt like I had to stop and look something up because I knew that it would be explained in the book itself in a way that I was able to follow along.
And hopefully not there's no overwhelming info dumps. And I hope it didn't get boring, because there's a fine line between making something detailed enough to make it realistic and, overdoing it. I'm constantly aware of that back and forth.
I think you nailed it. It always felt like I had just enough to understand what was going on without feeling like I was trying to learn a new hobby.
Yeah, because nothing's worse than that.
Well, for example, the concept of dead wax from the title does show up several times in the book, and it doesn't get explained right away. But because I already had trust in the author, in this case you, I knew that it would be explained, so I was able to just roll with it. And when it did finally come up, it felt very fulfilling.
And it was clear enough. That's really good. I just loved, before I had started writing this book, I just loved the phrase written in dead wax. I thought it sounds like a crime novel. It almost has kind of an Edgar Allan Poe sense of mystery to it, right? It's almost Gothic.
Yeah.
And it's suggestive of something hidden or cryptic and slightly menacing. So I thought that's a great title. And for the Vinyl Detective series, that's a great title for the first novel.
Agreed.
This is not so much to do with the content of the book, but something I noticed reading it is that it seems like there are very different slang terms for cannabis depending on the region. For example, I've never built a joint in my life, but I have rolled quite a few. And so I just thought it was really interesting having that disconnect in just the slang terms used.
Well, my hero is quite puritanical. He does not partake of any drugs except coffee. But that doesn't do him and alcohol, to be fair. But that doesn't do him a lot of good, because he's surrounded with this constellation of friends and other characters who are completely debauched, particularly his friend Tinkler. So yes, indeed, cannabis does crop up in the novel. And I was thinking about all the different terms that one uses for cannabis in particular the other day, because I was working on a period story, and I thought, what would they have called it then? Because they used to call it extraordinary things like Mary Jane, Gage, Boo. Boo's a great one, which features in a Tom Waits song at some point. Pot, of course. Grass, of course. Weed. Yeah. So slang is just wonderful in every regard, but in relation to say drug use, it can be particularly rich. I was just, a few years ago, I suddenly had this kind of road to Damascus moment when I realized what cold turkey meant. Because everybody knows that cold turkey, and this doesn't feature in my novels at all because there's no hard drug use in any of the books so far, but cold turkey is when you're addicted usually to an opiate and you come off it and you go through withdrawal, and it's an unpleasant experience. But I suddenly had flashed on this thing one day that after Christmas, after you've had all the fun of Christmas, all that's left are the leftovers, which is cold turkey. So it's like the unpleasant leftovers after you've had all your pleasure. And I thought, well, that's the richness of language. Who came up with that? And why did it stick? I guess it's just because it was so expressive of the kind of doldrums and the grayness and lack of pleasure that can compare to the fun of Christmas back when you were addicted to hard drugs. Cold turkey. So yeah, the language, the slang surrounding drug use is rich and fascinating and amusing.
I was a little disappointed that jazz cigarettes never showed up, despite the amount of jazz in the novel.
I guess that's because our hero is a jazz lover, but he's not a dope smoker.
Right.
So that would be jazz cigarettes, like jazz hands, is one of those great terms.
So, Andrew, I have a question, because this is a series of books with 5 books out, and you said you're working on the 6th. When you wrote Written in Dead Wax, did you always intend for it to be a series, or?
Absolutely. The whole idea was to create a series. And when I wrote the first book, I gave it to my agent, and I felt like my entire destiny was at stake. I felt that I'd written the best thing I'd ever written. And I was at a point in my career where I desperately needed some kind of breakthrough. So I gave the book to my agent, and he didn't read it, and he didn't read it, and he didn't read it, didn't read it. And in the end, it took him 6 months to the day to read the book. Now, to stop myself going nuts, waiting, like pacing around outside the delivery room. I guess people don't do that anymore. People are present at births, but it's like that. And the only way out, the only sort of therapy I could apply to myself was writing the next book. And the next book, the second book, which is called The Runout Groove, went really well. And I was sort of on a roll by that point, and I just thought, I'll write the third one. And so not only were they conceived as a series, I wrote through them on the go, just back to back.
Wow.
Even though there was no deal in place. And at that point, when I began writing the other two, my agent hadn't even read the first one. So yeah, that was how committed I was to them being a series.
That's crazy to me. I honestly think I read this book in half a day. Like I couldn't stop reading it. I wanted to know
I don't want to be too fair to my former agent, but I have to say that he didn't say so much that it needed cutting, but I could tell that certain parts didn't hold his attention. I cut a lot. So I then ruthlessly approached the book, and I think I cut about 30,000 words out, which is a lot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a huge amount. So to give him his due, the draft that he read did not move as swiftly as the published draft. And it benefited mightily from cutting, which I have to emphasize, he didn't make that suggestion. He just sort of indicated by his lack of enthusiasm that something needed doing, and I just made a judgment call that it needed to be faster and funnier.
Well, you certainly did that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Before we move on to a more in-depth discussion of the content, we sort of like to wrap up this part with why should you read this book? We're not asking you can answer it, but we do have a prepared answer if you don't want to.
Because I want to put my cat through college, please. Yeah. I need the money. So what is your guys' answer?
Well, there's a lot of great reasons. Gosh, if you like mysteries or detective novels, this book is absolutely a book for you. Even if you don't like either of those things, the characters in this book are so compelling and fun to read about. This is also the book for you. Did I miss anything? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add because I think you said it all.
Yeah.
I mean, it works on so many levels.
And I was being facetious with my cat remark earlier, but when I was conceiving this as a series, I thought if this is going to work, it will work only if readers fall in love with the characters. And that, bless them, is what has happened. And thanks to social media, which has many bad things about it, also has some good things, you get feedback from people all the time who just say, I love these characters. I want to see more of them. They're like my friends, and that's what I go to the novels for, which is exactly what you need in a series to keep drawing people back. I know that because when I fall in love with the series, that's why. It's because I want to live the lives with those characters again that happens when you open the covers of those books.
Mm-hmm. Good characters can make or break one's enjoyment of a book.
Absolutely.
You need a lot else in a crime novel. Like you need a really good plot, a good story.
Yeah.
You need jeopardy, you need mystery, you need suspense. You need a string of interesting characters, and it all comes back to character in the end, because the protagonist has to be somebody who you're willing to go on the trip with.
To avoid spoilers for Written in Dead Wax, skip to 47 minutes.
Okay, so getting into spoiler territory, Nevada is a recurring character. She shows up throughout the series, but you do introduce in the back half of Written in Dead Wax, you do introduce another love interest. Did you know that Nevada would stay, or were you kind of playing with the idea that Ree might be the one?
No, it was always Nevada, and we know that because if we're in total spoiler territory,
yes,
it's because we think she's dead at one point.
Right.
And so that character has been stress tested to the maximum, whereas Ree, who is, I think, an interesting character, is not given that treatment and therefore was obviously never quite considered on the same level as Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we don't exactly see the moment where Ree and the main character get together. There's sort of a fade to black, whereas we see the entire relationship progression between Nevada and the main character, and we actually see them grow closer.
Good point. Yeah. It's more like a lived life, and the other's a bit more like a story.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, the progression with the relationship with Nevada was so well done. I was on board with the main character's decisions at every moment and bringing me through getting together, breaking up, and then getting back together. And I, as the reader, agreeing with all of those things is a masterpiece. I don't know how you did it.
I'm really, really pleased. One of the most gratifying things, I mentioned earlier that the books didn't see the light of day for a number of years, and they, if it left to my agent, they never would have done, because he just sort of tried a couple of people. They weren't interested. He just shelved them. So I kept on pursuing it myself. And a friend called Guy Adams recommended a fantastic editor at Titan Books called Miranda Jewis. And so I myself sent the books to her, and then she read them and she loved them. And there was so many great things about that. One of the greatest sentences I'd ever heard of all time was, "We want to publish the books. We don't want any changes," which is one of the things she said. But one of the other great things that she said to me, Miranda, who is still, I'm only talking of her in the sort of past tense because she's moved on from my publisher to become a very successful crime editor at another firm. One of the other wonderful things that she did say to me was that she liked the female characters, that she said that male writers often create, and I don't think I'd heard this term before, manic pixie dream girls, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah.
And she said she's absolutely not like that. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I felt very proud of that. And I remembered that I'd always really liked an Irish-Canadian writer called Brian Moore. And one of the defining characteristics of his novels were that they often were female-centric, and the characters were so beautifully drawn. And I just love Brian Moore because of his writing. The quality of his writing is superlative. He's a mainstream novelist, although he started out writing crime novels under a pseudonym. Yeah, he started out writing murder mysteries. Anyway, so I always felt that I was schooled or mentored by writers like that. So if that led to me writing better female characters, then I'm very proud, very grateful to Brian Moore.
It's true. They actually feel like people instead of plot devices.
Yeah.
Which is very nice to read. Something that was interesting about this book is that it is in a two-part format. And, well, I especially read it as an ebook. So when I was drawing to the end of part 1, I didn't know how much book was left.
It so creates a different experience, that, doesn't it?
Oh, it was like an extra dimension of the mystery, because we were clearly drawing to the end of the first arc.
The first phase, absolutely, yeah.
But I had so many questions and I was so upset. And then I swipe the page and there's more. I was so glad.
Oh, they kind of need, because it's such an important part of the experience of reading a book. They sort of need the equivalent on an ebook of the counting of the pages left that we all have. Because, for instance, one thing that can spoil the experience of reading a novel is if you're reading a physical book and it looks like there's loads of text left, and you come to the end of the book and then you realize that the text, that huge chunk of text, is like, here's the 3 chapters of the next book in the series, or something like that. So I was very adamant to my publishers that if we were going to do something like that we would have to put a stain down the side of the page or something, because I've seen them do that. Like, you do the additional material after the end of the book is on different color paper slightly. And that works because you know where the main narrative ends. But it's such a delicate balance, because otherwise it can really spoil the pleasure and the mood of a story. But extraordinarily enough, my old agent, who's getting a lot of stick, perhaps deservedly in the course of this interview, one of his notes was, "Why don't you just end it there?" I thought, what a terrible note. I mean, no.
that would have been horrible.
It would have been horrible. I mean, it would have left Nevada dead. It would have, it never would have solved the mystery. It was just like one of these dumb notes, I thought. Probably motivated by the fact that the novel was too long, but that was not the solution.
Yes.
But yes, so, and none of my other books in the series mimic that structure, but as soon as I realized it was going to be in 2 halves, I thought, oh, it's going to be side 1 and side 2, just like I reckon. I was so proud of that conceit.
I actually loved the process of discovering that, especially with a mystery novel, because sometimes there's the red herring experience. you know it's a red herring because it's at the beginning of the book. So you know it's not the answer. But if you don't know how much book is left, then that could be the solution.
I love when you bring up red herrings. From books later in the series, I've started to have a lot of fun with red herrings.
Mm-hmm.
I've given people names that if you scrutinize them carefully, you might discover that they were the red herring, or behavior that clearly indicated that they were the red herring and nobody's spotted it so far. It's just so much fun.
So you've talked a little bit about this before, but this is a mystery novel, so all of the pieces have to ultimately fit together. And you said that you cut 30,000 words and you did some tightening up, but how different is the finished version, like, from...
In plot terms, not different at all. No.
Okay. So it always had the same points. It's just...
Yeah, just to give you an example, there's a bit where he goes down to Wales and he visits this factory, and they're going to clean the record there, and then even though this is the spoiler replete version, there's lots of action and mayhem that takes place down there. So they go to the factory with this guy and they do some stuff with the record at the factory, this rare record that is the object of their quest. Well, in the original version, they went to the factory. The guy said, "Come back to my house, have lunch with my family." And they did all that. Then they went back to the factory again. And so that was like 5 pages that could just go. They just stayed at the factory. Poor guy's family is never, it exists somewhere, but it doesn't exist in that novel. So that, you see, it's all the same movement to the same destination, but there was detours along the way that have been removed.
That makes sense.
Something that I thought was very interesting was sort of the interaction with technology. The main character obviously has some very strong opinions about audio technology, but it does eventually play a key role in the discovery of the dead wax clues.
Yeah, that's true. This is the most heavily technical of the books, but I don't think anybody should be put off by that, because it's, as you say, it's all quite interleaved with the nature of the mystery itself.
Absolutely. I internally cheered when they got to the point where they told someone, "Just send me a picture of the album."
Right.
Because it's always interesting in a story that's supposed to take place in modern times, but they don't take advantage of modern solutions.
It's true that for suspense novels, particularly, the invention of the mobile phone is a considerable quandary.
Yeah. So that utilization, I think, felt very genuine and made me appreciate the mystery so much more, because it didn't feel like a plot hole.
Thank heavens.
Yeah.
So this is one of the only books, I believe. I actually haven't read Low Action. It's sitting on my shelf staring at me.
I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I have been inspired by rereading Written in Dead Wax to pick it up. I've been meaning to for ages. It's just that life has gotten in the way. But as far as I can recall, this is one of the only books that has a significant portion of the action take place outside of the UK, like, because there's events in Japan and in LA. What went into the decision to set some of the action outside?
One reason that book was 30,000 words too long is it was hugely ambitious. It was like a real first novel, though I had written books before. This was my first real attempt to stake my claim to being a crime novelist. So it was hugely ambitious. So I wanted to go all over the world and have big action scenes. And so that was why we ended up not only going to Los Angeles, but also going to Japan. And you're right. Most of the books have remained in Britain ever since. However, the book I'm working on now, number 6, Attack and Decay, is set mostly in Sweden.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's great. And of course, this is, although I did research Japan online, everywhere else is based on places I've actually been, which I think is really worth doing. And so I went to Sweden a couple of years ago, and that experience has proved so fertile and rich in plotting the book and creating the place for the book. Having said that, I've invented places completely. There's a completely imaginary place in the book that you haven't read yet, Low Action, which I won't tell you about, but I'd love to talk to you about afterwards, because people kind of love that place. The people said, "I want to go there." And of course, it only exists in my mind. But it is a place, again, in Britain. So I'm just wildly ransacking my mind to think if we go outside the UK in any of the books. I don't think, again, until Sweden in the new one.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's so often when a book is set outside of an author's home country, you can feel that there's a little bit of unfamiliarity there, but I didn't feel that for LA or for Japan. And I mean, you go to LA on a fairly regular basis. So it really felt like you were familiar with the area.
And also, when he goes to Japan, the guy he's going to see is like a super audiophile kind of guy. So I know that world, even though I may not know the specifics of what it would be like to live in a particular area of Japan. I do know the kind of life and philosophy that somebody like that would have.
Exactly.
We mentioned earlier that you've written other works and even other mystery and detective novels. Did your process for the Vinyl Detective differ?
I think I just raised my game. And also, as people have remarked, writing is the classic example of learning by doing. So the more you write, the more your skills are sharpened. So I'd reached that point where, a kind of a tipping point, I guess, or maybe it's that 10,000 hour thing. I'd reached a watershed. And this is wonderful when it finally happens. When you start out writing, or at least when I started out writing, I had these visions of what I wanted to do. Then I'd write down what would try to achieve that vision. And it would be like if Homer Simpson did a sketch, what it would turn out like. So it would be this attempt to render what I had in my head in prose, and it would miss. But, I got closer and closer to expressing exactly what I meant. Around about this time, probably a book or two before this, I'd begun to reach the point where I could actually, to my own satisfaction, express the story and the narrative I had in my head on the page.
Fantastic. My next question is actually for Sarah. Sarah, you've read this novel more than once, and that will always sort of affect your experience of a mystery or a detective novel. And so I was wondering if there were any differences that you noticed or anything like that.
Yeah, so this is my second time reading Written in Dead Wax. I had first read it, as I believe I mentioned, back in 2018 or so. And it's been long enough that even though I still remembered like the beats of the story, the mystery still felt fresh. So there were things that I did not recall, but also just I was sufficiently invested in these characters. Like I loved learning about them and finding more depth to them, that it really, the mystery was almost secondary on this second reread. Like you can't always reread a mystery novel and enjoy it as much.
Exactly,
but I certainly did in this case.
I know what you mean, because once you know the plot moves, it's a very different experience. However, that brings us to my desire to create characters that people would grow affectionate towards and then want to go back. And they want us to spend time with them in new books, but they can also go back and spend time with them by rereading. And a number of people have got in touch. So I've just embarked on a project to reread the series, and that is the highest compliment. And it's one I totally understand, because I love doing that myself with my favorite series. And it's part of that's a huge part of the appeal and why they work.
Yeah, I'm a chronic rereader. So, but I would definitely say that even if like you would pick up this book maybe for the mystery, and then you would go back to it for the characters, because you do such a good job at making us invested in them and bringing them to life in a way that gives them a lot of depth and character.
A lot of that is to do with, I mentioned earlier that he doesn't have an easy time, but he also has a nemesis in the form of Stinky Stanmer.
Yes.
And I think that people can really relate to somebody, these kind of spoiler people, these characters who bedevil us, who are your nemesis. And that helps to create simultaneously sympathy for our hero and intense dislike for Stinky himself.
I perhaps sadistically loved every time he showed up, just because those scenes were some of my favorites.
They were really good. I'm with you, Lily. I actually really enjoy Stinky, not because I think he's a good person. I
couldn't stand him.
As a person, he's horrible, but he creates such entertaining conflict for our narrator.
And those scenes are so much fun to write, because he's such a reprehensible character.
So Lily, turning this back to you, you read this for the first time. You had not read this before. What did you feel reading it for the first time?
Well, one of the things that I love about detective and mystery novels is trying to guess along with the main character, trying to solve the mystery as you're reading it. And I will say, I think the first half there were a couple of things that I figured out a little bit before the Vinyl Detective, but with, as the story was explaining it to me, I picked up Nevada perhaps being a little bit more manipulative than we would first assume was one of those. But because it had that two-part structure, the second half was just a complete roller coaster because everything I had predicted had already happened.
Yeah, I was quite pleased because I worked out that there were several times in this when you think you've reached the sort of end of the trail, and then it blindsides you with something else. I remember I put a lot of work into plotting it and constructing the story.
Oh no, it was wonderful. Especially, like I said, reading an ebook, I never knew if that really was the end of the book or not. And so it was just sort of a constant discovery. It was so much fun.
What I tried to do here, as I say, was to create characters who would engage you and make you want to come back and read further books. And what we're talking about here really is cozy crime fiction in the sense that you have a kind of safe nucleus at the heart of the story. People who aren't going to end up, frozen and decapitated with a chainsaw in a lake in Sweden.
Yeah.
Although that sort of thing can happen, it doesn't hit at the very heart of our story. Although our central characters, even the cats, can be in jeopardy from time to time, but you just know that there's a certain safe port in the middle of this storm of narrative. And I think that's one of the great comforting things about cozy crime fiction. But don't be put off by the cozy label, because there can be great violence and great suspense as well, despite that sort of safe home port.
Yeah, so this is jumping ahead to, I think it's book 3, but I could be mistaken about that. There's a scene where the narrator, the Vinyl Detective, gets buried alive.
Oh no!
Oh my! Sorry for the spoiler, Lily. But
no, that's just such a scary thing.
That was terrifying. I felt so claustrophobic reading that. I was like, oh god. Yeah. So there's definitely
high
suspense
stakes
and high stakes in this series. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your current projects?
Yeah, so we've kind of touched on the fact that there's now a contract for the 6th Vinyl Detective story, and I'm hard at work on that, and I'm hoping to deliver that by the summer. And I'm also writing loads of stage plays, which are, obviously there's no theatres to put them in yet, but we're having online play readings, and I'm developing a network of fabulous actors who I'm hoping to turn into a repertory company to do a season of my plays in about 18 months' time.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yeah, summer after next is what we're thinking, fingers crossed.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind and hope that I can get to the UK by then.
And also, I've started to do a jazz radio show on an internet radio station on Sunday afternoons at 2:00, which is a terrible time for you guys on the West Coast of America, but we'll find a way of you guys listening on demand.
Yeah.
Are there recordings that we can listen to after the fact?
Yeah, it takes about 2.5 weeks for them to end up on the website on the radio station, but they do eventually end up there. And I've finally reached the point. The first half dozen shows, I didn't know how to work my microphone. Cats were intruding, but it's now starting to get to the point where the shows are, I think, worth listening to.
Where website? What is the website where we can find that?
This whole, so many things in my life came about through social media. I was approached by a wonderful person called Shay Coffey, who just asked if she could interview me for her new radio station, which is called Medway Pride Radio. And we did an interview. I think Shay was a Doctor Who fan and a Vinyl Detective fan, so wanted to talk to me about those things. And the interview went very well. So Shay came back to me and she said, would you like to do your own radio show on Medway Pride Radio? And I said, oh boy, would I ever? Can I choose my own music? And she said, yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Shay, and thank you, Medway Pride Radio, which I suddenly find myself on. And I'll send you links and all that good stuff.
Yeah, please do.
Fantastic. And I'd like to say thank you again for joining us. This was so much fun.
Oh, before you go though, one last question.
Please.
On Twitter, on Facebook, on where can you be found on the internet?
Well, on all of those, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, you'll know it's me because it's a picture of me with my cat Molly. looming at my shoulder. There are various Andrew Cartmels, but that's the one to go for. And I would say that the platform that gets most updated, most reliably would be Twitter, but I am on all of those things.
Wonderful.
Well, we'll see you there, if not in
Yes.
person someday.
And thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate it. It's been just an absolute delight to talk about.
It's been a thrill, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Yeah, there's lots of fun still to be had, including some. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I hope to speak to you again, perhaps about some of the other books. It'd be lovely. Absolutely. See you soon. Thank you very much. Bye.
Sarah, I have had time to play video games.
I am very jealous. I have not played any video games.
I mean, not a lot, but more than 0.
That's an improvement.
It's relevant because I've been playing The Witcher. I'm not just talking about video games on a book podcast.
I mean, you would be welcome to talk about video games on a book podcast. Video games have books associated with them.
I mean, kinda. I do kind of want to read like Skyrim, like books that are in Skyrim, or like things like that. Books that are in world books. Anyway, that could be fun, but damn, do we not have time for that anytime soon?
Nope. Anyway, so you've been playing The Witcher.
I've been playing The Witcher. I've gotten a little bit farther. I am fighting slightly fewer dogs, which I appreciate.
Good.
Something that I think is probably due to the format more than anything is how balanced the sort of general political scheme of the world is. For example, in the TV show, which is, I haven't read the books yet, I will. But in the TV show, there is Nilfgaard is one of the countries, and they are definitely the antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the video game, they're still kind of shady, but they are not the bad guys. They are at one side of the conflict in the land. You know, there are different countries. They're at war. Nilfgaard is the big one, and Tamaria, I think, is the other big one. They've been at war, but the video game does a very good job of, I don't want to say realistically depicting the ravages of war, because it's still a fantasy video game. But both sides are very cruel to the peasant folk. You could be conscripted by either one. Just because the other one was your king for longer doesn't mean you want to go die on the front lines. Both sides are stealing supplies from the peasant folk. I just found a bulletin board notice. That's how you get a lot of the jobs, is people put up help wanted, basically, and then you take the witchery type jobs.
Do you have to take the witchery type jobs? Could you take the regular jobs?
There aren't really regular jobs. There are warnings. So this is an example. This was on the bulletin board, but it's not a Witcher job. Saying if this country, I don't even remember which one it was, if they catch you with a cow or a pig that you haven't turned over to them, they will hang you.
Wow.
It's just,
that's rude.
Well, yeah. And it does such an interesting balance. Like there is no good guy. In war, everyone loses, type of thing. Because it is so much from the perspective of these very tiny villages that I'm just strolling through fighting monsters in, and they don't care which king they have.
It's all the same to them.
Yeah, there isn't a good guy country and a bad guy country. It just sucks. And it's so much more level, like emotionally, than, in the show.
Right.
There's a bad guy and a good guy country, which it makes sense from that perspective. The more like highfalutin politics, but you get just a different feeling for that conflict. And you really do. Well, also because it's a video game, you get that choose your own adventure aspect of the story, and you can kind of decide which side to help. You're not fighting on either side, but when you run into folk, you can choose to help or hinder them, and you can do that based, this is a Nilfgaardian soldier. Am I going to help him or am I going to kill him? It's such a different storytelling format than anything where there's just like a point A to point B and you get there. With a video game, you just have so many more complicated options that in a game like The Witcher actually does affect what happens. I am told. I have not gotten that far. I'm pretty sure they do.
I would imagine that they would.
It's just very cool experiencing a story in this way. And that's all. That's my Witcher update. There are no good guys. I guess this is the Witcher update.
I mean, that checks out.
Maybe less murder. Okay, thanks. Bye.
So Lily, we got a comment on Twitter, and I don't know if you saw that because you get our Twitter, but you don't really look at our Twitter. But a regular listener and friend of the show at Tony the Fong commented that he picked up Mexican Gothic after our discussion about it and put down what he was currently reading in favor of reading Mexican Gothic, which I thought was really, really cool.
Yeah. So, also, I'm sorry.
Yes. Or sorry, not sorry.
There you go.
But we were talking about how he was wondering if we had any more like recommendations for Gothic horror novels. And that's completely outside of my purview or my area of interest. But I thought I would pose the question to you, like if he wanted to read more, what should he read or watch?
Well, I do have opinions. Yeah, you threw in or watch because I already told you.
Yeah, I did.
I would say the thing that immediately comes to mind is the movie Crimson Peaks. Peak? I don't know how many peaks there are, but it's the Guillermo del Toro movie.
I just know that Tom Hiddleston is in it, but I've never actually watched it.
Oh, we gotta watch it. It's very good.
We made plans at one point.
I made very drunk plans with you, which
Yes.
Everyone knows you're not allowed to hold me to. We'll still do it eventually.
Eventually.
But that, I would say, hits all of the same beats that Mexican Gothic does in the sort of, I'd call it more of a Gothic romance. You've been throwing around the phrase Gothic horror, which is slightly different.
I mean, I put words together that sound like they go together. I don't actually know what I'm saying.
No, it's fine. The Gothic novel can refer to a lot of different things. So I would say it sort of depends on which elements of Mexican Gothic particularly resonated with you. If you liked that just sort of ambiance and supernatural element, okay, I did Google Gothic horror books and I'm going through this. A lot of them I don't think are good though. Like Dracula and Frankenstein? No. No. Dracula is an epistolary novel. Epistolary novel. So it's written entirely in letters back and forth and diary entries and things, and it is not the same feel as Mexican Gothic at all. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is very good. It definitely has that ambiance to it, but the plot structure is completely different. It doesn't have that, young girl goes to a spooky castle and there's a scary family living there, which, as I discussed, is the thrust of the Gothic romance.
Mm-hmm.
I think I gave spoilers for Jane Eyre in that episode, so sorry, but also that's a great one. Pretend you don't remember what I said and go read Jane Eyre, because that's definitely a good one. One that I didn't bring up, and also I think covers a lot of those same tropes that I discussed for Mexican Gothic, is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier.
Mm.
It really has, the mystery there is top notch. And then it definitely has that sort of fish out of water girl marries someone too quick and is in over her head. And if that was the aspect of Mexican Gothic that appealed to you, Rebecca's got you covered, let me tell you. I have not actually read Wuthering Heights, but I hear very good things. Maybe I'll have to read it soon so I can give a better...
I think I read Wuthering Heights. I did not... If I read it, I did not enjoy it, which checks out because this is not the kind of genre that I prefer.
Yeah. The other thing, too, is that Mexican Gothic is an extremely modern participation in the genre. And a lot of the other books I've read are not period pieces, but from the era that it sort of originated.
They've got some age to them.
Yeah, they do feel different. The prose is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Jane Eyre and Rebecca are both very good books, but they don't read the same way because they're old.
I didn't like Jane Eyre, but again, this is really not my genre.
Yeah. And then some of these are just bad. Interview with a Vampire? No. No. Bad Google. It does recommend some Edgar Allan Poe, which I do agree with. I think I also spoiled The Fall of the House of Usher.
Yes, you did.
And that's more of a short story novella, but definitely read it. It has that the spooky Moors scary castle thing. Like, I mean, Poe is the master, right?
Mm.
There is, of course, I do not recommend reading this. Unless you're going for the historical value, I do not recommend reading The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. Because it is so old. And I'm not saying that old things are not fun to read, but I'm making a face at Sarah and you can't tell, but the face is correct.
It's definitely a face. It is definitely a face.
It's very fascinating to see. Castle of Otranto is considered Otranto. Excuse me. There's not as many N's in that word as I thought. The Castle of Otranto is definitely, I would say, has historical value. We've talked a little bit about, maybe we haven't yet. Ooh, spoilers for bonus episodes that we have not released. Well, there is value in reading an influential work, even if the work itself is not something you would necessarily read for pleasure. I think so anyway. And The Castle of Otranto it's very short. It's not, I wouldn't even call it a novella, I don't think, although I don't remember off the top of my head. And it is considered the very first Gothic novel, just period. So it founded the genre. So if that interests you, go for it. If you're actually looking for a story that you want to get sucked into and maybe have some romantic shenanigans, no. No.
Your face is so unamused right now.
I don't want to do a spoiler section for this just little tiny bit, especially since we're talking about book recommendations. I just feel like just comes so far out of left field. It's like, what the fuck? You're reading this book and it's like, oh, spooky castle. Okay. Oh, and there's what? There's really no more to say on Castle of Otranto. I feel like this was not actually very helpful. Now I feel bad for spoiling some of the other stuff because those are good and what I would recommend. Poe has a ton. Just go read some of his. He has some more mystery detective novellas that are very, very good. They don't have that romance plot line, so I wouldn't say it hits all of the points that Mexican Gothic does. Yeah, okay. If you're here for the mystery, go read Poe. If you're here for the romance plot lines, go read Bronte. Any of them, any and all of them.
And if you like everything, just go watch Crimson Peak.
Exactly. There we go.
Boom.
I know I'd get to an answer eventually if I stumbled through it long enough.
So I have a pet peeve that I want to submit for consideration in the Pet Peeve Corner.
All right.
I was reading a fan fiction the other day, and one of the tags is slow burn.
Mm-hmm.
So I was expecting that it would take a good, 15 to 20 chapters before anyone so much as like expresses their like for the other character.
Mm-hmm.
And instead they're making out by like chapter 8.
What?
And like in a relationship by chapter 9. And I'm like, this is the opposite of slow burn. This is not a slow burn.
To me, a slow burn, so I don't have the context of how long that piece is. But to me, a slow burn means that the characters don't get together until the last, like, 10%. However far that 10% might be, they don't get together until the last 10%. That's a slow burn.
Yeah, I definitely was expecting, I mean, I don't have anything quite so concrete as that, but I definitely expect there to be more longing than there was and more like tension and buildup. And like, don't get me wrong, this is a good fic. I'm enjoying it, but like they're having wet dreams at like chapter 5 and, you know, they're making out at chapter 8. And it's like, this is not a slow burn. This might not be a fast burn, but it's not a slow burn.
Well, how long are the chapters? I feel like we're using some sort of nebulous.
They're decently long, but it moves fast enough. There's no build up.
Right.
There's no tension there. It's just like these characters like each other. These characters are together.
Right.
Like there's none of that longing.
I always think it's funny when a 10,000 word story uses the tag slow burn.
Yeah.
That's practically flash fiction. Get out of here with that. Well, I'm sorry that your slow burn burned too quickly.
I mean, it like I said, it's a good fic, but also just not a slow burn.
Incorrect tagging is the worst.
It really is.
Because maybe you're just feeling something specific.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I really wanted that tension. Actually, if I wanted that tension, I would just go back and reread Legacy of the Brightwash.
There you go. Justin Gross, this is for you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us, or Sarah, because she's on Twitter and Instagram at fictionfanspod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thank you again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.